Ozma of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 3. Letters in the Sand. Walking a little way back from the water's edge toward the grove of trees, Dorothy came to a flat stretch of white sand that seemed to have queer signs marked upon its surface, just as one would write upon sand with a stick. "What does it say?" she asked the yellow hen, who trotted along beside her in a rather dignified fashion. "How should I know?" returned the hen. "I can't read." "Oh, can't you?" "Certainly not. I've never been to school, you know." "Well, I have," admitted Dorothy, "but the letters are big and far apart, and it's hard to spell out the words." But she looked at each letter carefully and finally discovered that these words were written in the sand. "Beware the Wheelers." "That's rather strange," declared the hen, when Dorothy had read aloud the words. "What do you suppose the Wheelers are?" "Folks that wheel, I guess. They must have wheelbarrows or baby cabs or hand carts," said Dorothy. "Perhaps they're automobiles," suggested the yellow hen. "There's no need to beware of baby cabs and wheelbarrows, but automobiles are dangerous things. Several of my friends have been run over by them." "It can't be automobiles," replied the girl, "for this is a new wild country without even trolley cars or telephones. The people here haven't been discovered yet, I'm sure. That is, if there are any people. So I don't believe there can be any automobiles, Bellina." "Perhaps not," admitted the yellow hen. "Where are you going now?" "Over to those trees to see if I can find some fruit or nuts," answered Dorothy. She tramped across the sand, skirting the foot of one of the little rocky hills that stood near, and soon reached the edge of the forest. At first she was greatly disappointed, because the nearer trees were all punita or cottonwood or eucalyptus, and bore no fruit or nuts at all. But by and by, when she was almost in despair, the little girl came upon two trees that promised to furnish her with plenty of food. One was quite full of square paper boxes, which grew in clusters on all the limbs, and upon the biggest and ripest boxes the word lunch could be read in neat raised letters. This tree seemed to bear all the year round, for there were lunchbox blossoms on some of the branches, and on others tiny little lunch boxes that were as yet quite green and evidently not fit to eat until they had grown bigger. The leaves of this tree were all paper napkins, and it presented a very pleasing appearance to the hungry little girl. But the tree next to the lunchbox was even more wonderful, for it bore quantities of tin dinner pails, which were so full and heavy that the stout branches bent underneath their weight. Some were small and dark brown in color. Those larger were full of dull tin color, but the really ripe ones were pails of bright tin that shone and glistened beautifully in the rays of sunshine that touched them. Dorothy was delighted, and even the yellow hen acknowledged that she was surprised. The little girl stood on tiptoe and picked one of the nicest, biggest lunch boxes. And then she sat down upon the ground and eagerly opened it. Inside she found, nicely wrapped in white papers, a ham sandwich, a piece of sponge cake, a pickle, a slice of new cheese, and an apple. Each thing had a separate stem, and so had to be picked off the side of the box. But Dorothy found them all to be delicious, and she ate every bit of luncheon in the box before she had finished. "A lunch isn't exactly breakfast," she said to Bellina, who sat beside her curiously watching. "But when one is hungry, one can eat even supper in the morning and not complain." "I hope your lunchbox was perfectly ripe," observed the yellow hen in an anxious tone. "So much sickness is caused by eating green things." "Oh, I'm sure it was ripe," declared Dorothy. All that is, 'cept the pickle, and a pickle it just has to be green, Bellina. But everything tasted perfectly splendid, and I'd rather have it than a church picnic. And now I think I'll pick a dinner pail to have when I get hungry again, and then we'll start out and explore the country and see where we are." "Haven't you any idea what country this is?" inquired Bellina. "None at all. But listen, I'm quite sure it's a fairy country, or such things as lunch boxes and dinner pails wouldn't be growing upon trees. Besides, Bellina, being a hen, you wouldn't be able to talk in any civilized country like Kansas, where no fairies live at all." "Perhaps we're in the land of Oz," said the hen thoughtfully. "No, that can't be," answered the little girl, "because I've been to the land of Oz, and it's all surrounded by a horrid desert that no one can cross." "Then how did you get away from there again?" asked Bellina. "I had a pair of silver shoes that carried me through the air, but I lost them," said Dorothy. "Ah, indeed," remarked the yellow hen in a tone of unbelief. "Anyhow," resumed the girl, "there's no seashore near the land of Oz, so this must surely be some other fairy country." While she was speaking, she selected a bright and pretty dinner pail that seemed to have a stout handle and picked it from its branch. Then, accompanied by the yellow hen, she walked out of the shadow of the trees toward the seashore. They were part way across the sands when Bellina suddenly cried in a voice of terror, "What's that?" Dorothy turned quickly round and saw coming out of a path that led from between the trees the most peculiar person her eyes had ever beheld. It had the form of a man, except that it walked, or rather rolled, upon all fours, and its legs were the same length as its arms, giving them the appearance of the four legs of a beast. Yet it was no beast that Dorothy had discovered, for the person was clothed most gorgeously in embroidered garments of many colors, and wore a straw hat perched jauntily upon the side of its head. But it differed from human beings in this respect, that instead of hands and feet, there grew on the ends of its arms and legs round wheels, and by means of these wheels it rolled very swiftly over the level ground. Afterward, Dorothy found that these odd wheels were of the same hard substance that our fingernails and toenails are composed of, and she also learned that creatures of this strange race were born in this queer fashion. But when our little girl first caught sight of the first individual of a race that was destined to cause her a lot of trouble, she had an idea that the brilliantly clothed personage was on roller skates, which were attached to its hands as well as to its feet. "Run!" screamed the yellow hen, fluttering away in great fright. "It's a Wheeler!" "A Wheeler!" exclaimed Dorothy. "What can that be?" "Don't you remember the warning in the sand? Beware the Wheelers! Run, I tell you, run!" So Dorothy ran, and the Wheeler gave a sharp, wild cry and came after her in full chase. Looking over her shoulder as she ran, the girl now saw a great procession of Wheelers emerging from the forest, dozens and dozens of them, all clad in splendid, tight-fitting garments, and all rolling swiftly toward her and uttering their wild, strange cries. "They're sure to catch us," panted the girl, who was still carrying the heavy dinner pail as she had picked. "I can't run much farther, Bellina." "Climb up this hill, quick," said the hen, and Dorothy found she was very near to the heap of loose and jagged rocks they had passed on their way to the forest. The yellow hen was even now fluttering among the rocks, and Dorothy followed as best she could, half climbing and half tumbling up the rough and rugged steep. She was none too soon, for the foremost Wheeler reached the hill a moment after her. But while the girl scrambled up the rocks, the creature stopped short with howls of rage and disappointment. Dorothy now heard the yellow hen laughing in her cackling henny way. "Don't hurry, my dear," cried Bellina. "They can't follow us among these rocks, so we're safe now." Dorothy stopped at once and sat down upon a broad boulder, for she was all out of breath. The rest of the wheelers had now reached the foot of the hill, but it was evident that their wheels would not roll upon the rough and jagged rocks, and therefore they were helpless to follow Dorothy and the hen to where they had taken refuge. But they circled all round the little hill, so the child and Bellina were fast prisoners and could not come down without being captured. Then the creatures shook their front wheels at Dorothy in a threatening manner, and it seemed they were able to speak as well as to make their dreadful outcries, for several of them shouted, "We'll get you in time, never fear. And when we do get you, we'll tear you into little bits." "Why are you so cruel to me?" asked Dorothy. "I'm a stranger in your country, and have done you no harm." "No harm?" cried one of them that seemed to be the leader. "Did you not pick our lunch boxes and dinner pails? Have you not stolen dinner pail still in your hand?" "I only picked one of each," she answered. "I was hungry and I didn't know the trees were yours." "That's no excuse," retorted the leader, who was clothed in a most gorgeous suit. "It is the law here that whoever picks a dinner pail without our permission must die immediately." "Don't you believe him," said Bellina. "I'm sure the trees don't belong to these awful creatures. They are fit for any mischief, and it's my opinion they would try to kill us just the same if you hadn't picked a dinner pail." "I think so too," agreed Dorothy. "But what shall we do now?" "Stay where we are," advised the yellow hen. "We're safe from the wheelers until we starve to death anyhow. And before that time comes, a good many things could happen." Chapter 4. Tick-Tock, the Machine Man. After an hour or so, most of the band of wheelers rolled back into the forest, leaving only 3 of their number to guard the hill. These curled themselves up like big dogs and pretended to go to sleep on the sands, but neither Dorothy nor Bellina were fooled by this trick, so they remained in security among the rocks and paid no attention to their cunning enemies. Finally, the hen fluttered over the mound, exclaimed, "Why, here's a path!" So Dorothy at once climbed to where Bellina sat, and there, sure enough, was a smooth path cut between the rocks. It seemed to wind around the mound from top to bottom, like a corkscrew, twisting here and there between the rough boulders, but always remaining level and easy to walk upon. Indeed, Dorothy wondered at first why the wheelers didn't roll up this path, but when she followed it to the foot of the mound, oh my gosh, she found that several big pieces of rock had been placed directly across the end of the way, thus preventing anyone outside from seeing it, and also preventing the wheelers from using it to climb up the mound. Then Dorothy walked back up the path and followed it until she came to the very top of the hill, where a solitary round rock stood that was bigger than any of the others surrounding it. The path came to an end just beside this great rock, and for a moment it puzzled the girl to know why the path had been made at all. But the hen, who had been gravely following her around and was now perched upon a point of rock behind Dorothy, suddenly remembered, "It looks something like a door, doesn't it?" "What looks like a door?" inquired the child. "Why, that crack in the rock just facing you," replied Bellina, whose little round eyes were very sharp and seemed to see everything. "It runs up one side and down the other, and across the top and bottom." "What does?" "Why, the crack. So I think it must be a door of rock, although I don't see any hinges." "Oh, yes," said Dorothy, now observing for the first time the crack in the rock. And isn't this a keyhole, Bellina, pointing to a round, deep hole at the one side of the door. Of course! If we only had the key, now we could unlock it and see what is there, replied the yellow hen. Maybe it's a treasure chamber full of diamonds and rubies, or heaps of shining gold, or... That reminds me, said Dorothy, of the golden key I picked up on the shore. Do you think that it would fit this keyhole, Bellina? Try it and see, suggested the hen. So Dorothy searched in the pocket of her dress and found the golden key. And when she put it into the hole of the rock and turned it, a sudden sharp snap was heard. Then with a solemn creak that made the shivers run down the child's back, the face of the rock fell outward like a door on hinges and revealed a small dark chamber just inside. Good gracious, cried Dorothy, shrinking back as far as the narrow path would let her. For, standing within the narrow chamber of rocks was the form of a man. Or at least, it seemed like a man in the dim light. He was only about half as tall as Dorothy herself, and his body was round as a ball and made out of burnished copper. Also his head and limbs were copper, and these were jointed or hinged to his body in a peculiar way, with metal caps over the joints like the armor worn by knights in days of old. He stood perfectly still, and where the light struck upon his form, it glittered as if made of pure gold. Don't be frightened, called Bellina from her perch. It isn't alive. I see it isn't, replied the girl, drawing a long breath. It is only made of copper, like the old kettle in the barnyard at home, continued the hen, turning her head first to one side and then to the other, so that both her little round eyes could examine the object. Once, said Dorothy, I knew a man made out of tin, who was a woodman named Nick Chopper. But he was as alive as we are, 'cause he was born a real man and got his tin body a little at a time, first a leg and then a finger, then an ear, for the reason that he had so little accidents with his axe and cut himself up in a very careless manner. Oh, said the hen with a sniff, as if she did not believe the story. But this copper man, continued Dorothy, looking at it with big eyes, isn't alive at all, and I wonder what it was made for and why it was locked up in this queer place. That is a mystery, remarked the hen, twisting her head to arrange her wing feathers with her bill. Dorothy stepped inside the little room to get a back view of the copper man, and in this way discovered a printed card that hung between his shoulders, it being suspended from a small copper peg at the back of his neck. She unfastened this card and returned to the path where the light was better, and sat herself down upon a slab of rock and read the printing. What does it say? Asked the hen curiously. Dorothy read the card aloud, spelling out the big words with some difficulty, and this is what she read. Smith and Tinkers, patent double action, extra responsive, thought creating, perfect talking, mechanical man, fitted with our special clockwork attachment, thinks, speaks, acts, and does everything but live. Manufactured only at our works at Evna, land of EV. All infringements will be promptly persecuted according to law. How queer, said the yellow hen. Do you think that is all true, my dear? I don't know, answered Dorothy, who had more to read. Listen to this, Bellina. Directions for using. For thinking, wind the clockwork man under his left arm, marked number 1. For speaking, Wind the clockwork man under his right arm, marked number 2. For walking in action, wind clockwork in the middle of his back, marked number 3. NB. This mechanism is guaranteed to work perfectly for 1,000 years. Well, I declare, gasped the yellow hen in amazement. If the copper man can do half of these things, he is a very wonderful machine. But I suppose it's all humbug, like so many other patented articles. We might wind him up, suggested Dorothy, and see what he'll do. Where's the key to the clockwork? Asked Billina. Hanging on the peg where I found the card. Then, said the hen, let us try him and find out if he will go. He is warranted for 1,000 years, it seems. But we don't know how long he's been standing inside this rock. Dorothy had already taken the clock key from the peg. Which shall I wind up first? She asked, looking again at the directions on the card. Number 1, I should think, returned Billina. That makes him think, doesn't it? Yes, said Dorothy, and wound up number 1 under the left arm. He doesn't seem any different, remarked the hen critically. Why, of course not. He's only thinking now, said Dorothy. I wonder what he's thinking about. I'll wind up his talk, and then perhaps he can tell us, said the girl. So she wound up number 2, and immediately the clockwork man said, without moving any part of his body except his lips, Good morning, little girl. Good morning, Mrs. Hen. The words sounded a little hoarse and creaky, and they were uttered all in the same tone, without any change of expression whatever. But both Dorothy and Billina understood them perfectly. Good morning, sir, they answered politely. Thank you for rescuing me, continued the machine in the same monotonous voice, which seemed to be worked by a bellows inside of him, like the little toy lambs and cats the children squeeze so that they will make a noise. Don't mention it, answered Dorothy. And then, being very curious, she asked, How did you come to be locked up in this place? It is a long story, replied the copper man, but I will tell it to you briefly. I was purchased from Smith and Tinker, my manufacturers, by a cruel king of Ev, named Evaldo, who used to beat all his servants until they died. However, he was not able to kill me because I was not alive, and one must first live in order to die, so that all his beating did me no harm, and merely kept my copper body well polished. This cruel king had a lovely wife and 10 beautiful children, 5 boys and 5 girls, but in a fit of anger he sold them all to the Gnome King, who by means of his magic arts changed them all into other forms and put them in his underground palace to ornament the rooms. Afterward, the king of Ev regretted his wicked action and tried to get his wife and children away from the Gnome King, but without avail. So in despair, he locked me up in this rock, threw the key into the ocean, and then jumped in after it and was drowned. How very dreadful! Exclaimed Dorothy. It is indeed, said the machine. When I found myself imprisoned, I shouted for help until my voice ran down, and then I walked back and forth in this little room until my action ran down, and then I stood still and thought until my thoughts ran down. After that I remember nothing until you wound me up again. It's a very wonderful story, said Dorothy, and proves that the land of Ev is really a fairyland as I thought it was. Of course it is, answered the copper man. I do not suppose such a perfect machine as I could be made in any place but a fairyland. I've never seen one in Kansas, said Dorothy. But where did you get the key to unlock this door? Asked the clockwork voice. I found it on the shore where it was probably washed up by the waves, she answered. And now, sir, if you don't mind, I'll wind up your action. That will please me very much, said the machine. So she wound up number 3, and at once the copper man, in a somewhat stiff and jerky fashion, walked out of the rocky cavern, took off his copper hat, and bowed politely, and then kneeled before Dorothy. Said he, "From this time forth I am your obedient servant. Whatever you command, that I will do willingly, if you keep me wound up." "What is your name?" she asked. "Tick-tock," he replied. "My former master gave me that name because my clockwork always ticks when it is wound up." "I can hear it now," said the yellow hen. "So can I," said Dorothy, and then she added with some anxiety, "You don't strike, do you?" "No," answered the tick-tock, "and there is no alarm connected with my machinery. I can tell the time, though, by speaking, and as I never sleep, I can waken you at any hour you wish to get up in the morning." "That's nice," said the little girl, "only I never wish to get up in the morning." "You can sleep until I lay my eggs," said the yellow hen. "Then when I cackle, Tick-tock will know it's time to waken you." "Do you lay your egg very early?" asked Dorothy. "About 8 o'clock," said Billina, "and everybody ought to be up by then, I'm sure."